Okay, you got it? Sure. All right. Hello, everyone. You guys hear me all right? Yeah? All right. How y'all doing today? Good. I like this. Very responsive crowd. Okay. Welcome to CSC and NSOC's collaborative Prof Talks, who we have our special speaker, Gavin, Duggan. But in terms of introductions, I'll leave that to our very own Dean, Dr. Wells of Engineering. So can we get a round of applause for Dr. Wells?
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to take too much time, but I did meet Dr. Duggan in California.
Yeah, a few months ago.
A few months ago. And while I was there, we had a wonderful chat. And he was telling me a little bit of his journey from being an alum from here in computer science.
Computer science and biology.
Computer science, biology, and then doing a PhD later on. Now works at Google X. And his own journey. And he does have ADHD. And how many of you in the room have ADHD? So a few of you. And what I loved about the way he described it to me was from what I would call an asset mind frame instead of a deficit mindset. And you know, how he could harness the power of having ADHD. And so I really encouraged him. I said, you know, you've got to come talk to our students. I know so many of our students have ADHD. We teach students with ADHD. I'd like to learn more about it and how we can unleash that human potential in students that have it. Because I know so many students I've met that do have ADHD look at it as a deficit, like that I can't get things done and all this stuff. But I hope for those of you that do have it, that you learn something here and really feel empowered to do the amazing things that you can do and reach your own human potential. So thank you so much, Gavin, for spending the time to talk about your personal journey and what you've accomplished. And we are so proud to welcome you back to your alum, you know, as an alumnus and things. So again, welcome again, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thanks. All right, so we got some people in the front, people in the back. Can you all hear me at the back, or would you prefer that I use the voice of God? Like, I can use this thing, but then it's all spooky and stuff. Thumbs up for the microphone. All right, we'll stick with the microphone. Cool. So thank you for the introduction. I'm gonna talk about some stuff today, but I think what I wanted to start with actually is why might you care what I have to say? Because honestly, to start with, I'm a middle-aged white guy in tech. And there's lots of those opinions flying around. You don't usually. But a friend of mine reminded me a while back that I'm also a neurodivergent immigrant from low to middle income working class family. And I've managed to tell a pretty interesting story with life. Some failures, some successes. So I was going to sort of walk through some of that. I'll let you decide whether it's interesting or not. All right. I'm actually just going to do this with a show of hands. Can I just get hands up if you are in first, second, or third year? All right. Hands up if you're in fourth year, grad student, faculty. Cool. All right, so now I know who we're talking to. That's great. And second question, how much do you know about AUD? So raise your hand if you're like, I have no idea what that even means. Cool, that's good. I'm not going to talk a ton about it today. I'm going to talk some at the end about it, and then as we go through, it's been obviously important to my journey, and why, what it is and what it isn't. But mostly, I just wanted to talk about how I've sort of interacted with a career perspective. So, talk about my career, talk about my story, and hopefully maybe you can learn a little bit from some of my failures and successes. I'm going to talk about some machine learning, which has been my primary tool after undergrad, in grad school, and at Google as a machine learning engineer. It's also useful from a career perspective and a little bit in terms of how you think about things. Going to talk about attention deficit disorder, which I put quotes around disorder, because while it wasn't a failing on my part, it sure created a few along the way. And then mostly I want to talk today about how to think differently about innovation. Because innovation really is the thing that you care about. That's what you're doing in these faculties, that's what you're working on, that's what's useful. I'm going to try to stay fairly superficial. I'm not going to dive too deep into details, but we'll have lots of time for discussion of questions at the end. Or feel free to raise your hand in the middle and we can do questions as we go. If there's details you want. So, let's start with a parallel, a story based in machine learning. If we're trying to train a machine learning neural network, there's a few steps we follow. First of all, we get the machine to make a guess. We run forward inference over the weights, and usually we start with randomized weights, which means that guess is pretty bad. That's okay. Next thing we do, we figure out how wrong that guess was. So we calculate the loss function. We basically say this is the actual value, this is the predicted value, how wrong was I? More importantly though, we then try to figure out why the guess was wrong. All right, so that's basically doing what we call backprop or gradient descent, which is where we figure out which of the weights that were used in the calculation of the prediction of the guess were important or unimportant, which one caused it to be right and which one caused it to be wrong. And then from there, we choose how to improve our next guess. That's basically figuring out which weights we should change based on the gradients in the model to update those gradients, update those weights, and we make a better guess. Cool, start again. This is not just a useful way to think about machine learning, it's also a fairly strong model for how we make decisions in general, whether it's career decisions, knowledge decisions, romance decisions, whatever. We learn these things by trial and error as humans. So how do we figure out when we're wrong, both machine learning and not? In the concrete world of machine learning math, there's a few different ways to calculate that gradient descent or that loss. But a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago now, some really smart people that I work with, like we published a paper called "Attention is All You Need." This is a really seminal paper. It's been cited, 90,000 times or something. And it really changed the landscape of machine learning. Of course, the title was really frustrating to me when they told me attention is all you need, because I was like 10 years into fighting with attention deficit disorder. I'm like, come on, guys, it's the one thing I don't have. But I learned that a lot of the attributes that we associate with attention deficit disorder were the things that had actually made me successful in my career. So that was kind of strange. And what I wanted to do is, like, how does a disorder account for so many of my wins and my losses in my career? So, what did my career look like? I don't want to spend forever talking about this, but I'll just sort of give you a quick walkthrough. In undergrad, I started in computer science at Warwick. And a year and a half in, I was doing a minor in physical sciences, and I decided to do a double major in biology. I did this because biology had some really cool problems, lots of interesting things. I was fascinated by a guy named K. Eric Drexler, who wrote the book on nanotechnology. I wanted to work on these problems, and so I went to the faculty and was like, hey, can I do a double major in this other faculty? And they're like, why? Like, you can't use biology and computers together. They're like, bioinformatics didn't exist. And I'm not going to claim that I'm like prescient or smart or that I saw this coming right there. I was just like, fascinated. I just wanted an interesting thing to work on. But I did get some strange ones. That I will say, however, in undergrad, that I also struggled with grades a lot. I'll talk about that more. Like, let's not pretend it was a smooth ride. I escaped. I escaped with 2 degrees. The Standings and Promotions Committee was like, here are your degrees, please go. Then I went to SickKids in Toronto. I worked there for 4 years on the Human Genome Project. I was on the team that did Chromosome 7 on the Human Genome Project. That was a lot of fun. We worked with the big Origin 3800 silicon supercomputers where all the processors were literally physically linked to each other's RAM. It was bizarre, but it worked. And I also worked at the Houston Lab, which is part of NASA here at, as a NASA associated lab at Waterloo. And there were other jobs that I could have done. And this was sort of the first turning point for me towards research and towards doing interesting things, because I had a lot of friends who were making a lot more money than me. We would go for dinner every 6 weeks or so. We'd get together, and they were all driving BMWs and Porsches and stuff, and I would take the bus. But I did get to say things like, well, I published a paper, in grad school where we helped find a cure for diabetes. So does that help? Like, I get to feel good a little bit. Point being, though, it was a hard, big problem. In grad school, I did a PhD in biochemistry at the University of Calgary. By that time, computational biology was a thing. This was 2006, 2007. And it started to take off, but I actually went the other way. I spent a lot of my time while I was writing analysis in R. I was also doing a lot of work in the lab, physically, pipetting, comparing my own samples, because I honestly believed that knowing your data, where it came from, what were its limitations, what were its implications, was critical to building these systems, these machine learning systems that could extract the information from them. So I worked with multi-omics in grad school, worked with systems biology, protein function prediction. These are all now projects at Google and many other large companies, BASF, Xerox, pick your favorite research company. They're all doing work in things like protein prediction, omics analysis, whether it's humans or other organisms. And I didn't have a huge outsized impact. I don't have any Nobel Prizes to my name. But I did get to publish a bunch of papers along the way in a bunch of journals. Published in Science, published in Nature, published in New England Journal of Medicine. Usually, Nobel was his first author. Not for any of those was the first author. But I got to publish in some good papers. And working on these things, these problems that I was engaging with, when the rest of the field caught up to my curiosity, then I was ready to sort of onboard quickly. I was ready to catch up. So you can call it curiosity, you can call it lack of focus, that I was just pinballing around between things. If you're generous, you can even call it ambition, that I was ambitious in which problems I was working on. But what I knew subconsciously was that I needed interesting problems to work on. That's what gave me motivation, was something that was hard, something that was meaningful, something that let me look at the big picture. And that turned out to be the secret to solving my attention deficit challenges, was working on harder problems. So that's a thread that's kind of run through my whole career. So the thing that I want you to take away from this talk, more than anything else, is that doing things differently, thinking differently about problems, just attacking a problem because it's interesting will make it harder, more meaningful, and potentially more interesting. So you have to kind of balance between those three. I feel like the mic's kind of going up and down. Sounds okay? Cool. So, chasing the hard problem. That's what gave me what I needed, personally. Went to Google Research, I originally didn't actually go to research. I started in social media marketing analytics, because they were willing to pay me. But then I worked into research, started the team that became Google Health. There was 4 of us, then there were 20 of us, and then there was 400 of us. I'm a bit of a serial prototyper. I build this smoking bundle of code and hardware sometimes. I generally don't let me touch hardware. But I build a prototype that does something impossible and then explodes. And then I give it to real engineers and say, please don't kill anybody with this. And so there's a lot of that different roles that happen that work together. Worked on mammography, worked on radiology, worked on some of Google's first medical devices for diabetic retinopathy, eye scan. We now have clinical trials that are running in automated mammogram scans so that women can get turnarounds faster on their mammograms, so they don't have to wait 6-8 days to find out if they have cancer. They can find out in 6 to 8 seconds. So feel good about those. I spent some time, a few months at Harvard doing an executive degree in the medical school there with Google. That was a lot of fun. And then I moved to X, which is the Moonshot Factory, which I'll talk about what X is, because you probably haven't heard of it, that's okay. And why it was the perfect place for me, personally. Yeah, like I said, the thread here was always chasing interesting problems, which was good and bad, but mostly good because it was the solution to the problem I had. Now, I do want to say, you don't need attention deficit disorder or attention deficit to think differently. There's lots of different ways of thinking differently. In fact, what you should think about, you should spend some time honestly reflecting about what makes you different. How do you think differently from most people? What are your strengths? How do you tend to approach problems, okay? There's this really cool concept, which by the way is not a particularly good reflection of what it actually means in Japan. But Ikigai is Ikigai is this concept that I love, this particular breakdown of it, which is that the perfect job, the perfect life comes from having a balance of these things. What do you need? What does the world need? What are you good at? What can you get paid for? And that one on the left, that what are you good at? What we're really talking about here is finding ways to excel in that quadrant, to be better than everyone else, because that's what innovation is. It's what lets you change the state of the art. But to do that, you have to reflect on what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. What should you target? What should you avoid? You want to try and find a balance between the things you're good at and the things that give you what you want. That's probably the hardest, biggest challenge in all of innovation, in terms of working in innovation, getting a job and a career. This is that you want to find things you're good at so that you can change the state of the art, but also things that give you what you want. Like I said, I went and worked in social media for a while because it got me paid. I had a newborn son, and it was time to get some money. I made my way back to research. Always remember when you're going through school, especially as you start to make these decisions, school gives you two things, knowledge and certification. Okay? And it's a balance between those two. You have to decide, do you want to spend time learning? Do you want to spend time getting the good grades? They both take time, they both take energy, they're both valuable. What you know is valuable, but also the certification, the piece of paper that you get. Don't pretend that it's not important for getting the job. Okay? So you have to find that balance and how it fits into this larger picture. All right, so let's see. Innovation, what is it? It's certainly not always crazy ideas, which is what people with ADHD tend to be really good at. Is sort of we can think about 10 things at the same time. Please don't ask me to think about one. I can't do that. Like, think about 10, which means I'm really good at coming up with crazy ideas. But that's not all innovation is. Innovation can be someone who's really good at iterating, at drilling down, working on the problem again and again, thinking, trying. Somebody who has that ability to focus and drill. The ability to juggle lots of complicated ideas in the head. Some of the mathematicians that I work with, some of the engineers at Google are incredibly good at just being able to put 3-4 ideas together at the same time, where most of us talk about one another, okay, cool, I can understand this thing. So maybe that's what makes you different. Knowing the history of the field, just being a person who is a reservoir of knowledge at a level of detail that everybody else is kind of surprised by. That can be an incredible asset, because when you ask the question, why is nobody doing this? The answer is, yeah, they tried that in the 60s, they blew up, don't do that. We have a couple of X projects that literally started from that story. So, insightful analysis, seeing the big picture, all these things. The question you want to do, whether it's in terms of technology or approach, is ask the question, what is everybody else not doing, and why? Okay? And that can be how you think of the problem differently, how you think of whether it's the technological solution you're trying, whether it's career, all the rest of it. Thinking differently is the asset. ADHD is just one kind of thinking differently. So I left Google. Well, I left Google proper. I'm at X, which is kind of half part of Google, half part of Alphabet. X is the Moonshot Factory. It is the branch of Alphabet which does large-scale, high-risk, high-reward, low-probability research projects. We've been called a skunk works, to be accurate. The things that we work on tend to be very low probability. Okay, these are things that are like 5% chance that we can get it to work. But if it pays off, it changes the world. We exist because while there are lots of research teams at Google doing different things, Google wants to also spend, Alphabet wants to spend some of its money taking shots. Shots on things that will not produce 1 million or 10 million or 100 million, but billions. Okay? Not just in terms of unicorns, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of impact, in terms of changing the world, making the world a better place. I chose X specifically because there are so many things about the X philosophy which map very well to how I approach problems. That's kind of what I want to talk to a bit. But yeah, the answer really to why X exists and what it does is that sometimes the question, why isn't anybody else doing this thing, is that's too hard. It's too big. Yeah, it might work theoretically, but nobody's got the runway to try that. It's going to take 3 years to try something really ambitious. 4 years, 5 years. Fine, that's X. That's what we do, is look at the really big, really hard, really long-term problem, and then attack that. What we aren't, there's a bunch of stuff that we aren't, and it's kind of important. It's not a production shop. We prototype things. We're not incremental. We're not trying to build things now. Research, science, engineering, all of these things are built with bricks, built on top of other people, built on the shoulders of giants. But most of the solutions we're looking for are radical solutions. They're just going off in left field. They're taking the eigenvectors of the linked graph of the internet and then using that to calculate, if you reduce that eigenvector matrix, what do you get? You get background. What's background? Background is Google search engine. That's what that idea was no, let's think of this as an algebra problem and solve it like that. Going big like that. Unfortunately, we're also not terribly public. The reason you don't hear a lot about X is because we try a lot of things. Most of them don't work, so we give up quickly and we move on to something else. If we were constantly publishing what we're working on, like in terms of the early phase, we'd make Google's already a bit of a problem with churn. Google has a problem with like starting things, trying things, and then killing them if they don't work. It makes sense from an engineering perspective, but from a product perspective, it's a pain in the ass. So we don't want to make it worse. So we try things, we keep them secret, we keep them confidential until we're confident that they're going to work. These are some of the projects that have come out of X. Waymo, self-driving cars, like all self-driving cars, modern self-driving cars, came out of a project at X. Google Glass was an attempt to change human-computer interaction. Verily and the baseline projects, you may have seen the contact lens, the diabetic contact lens, didn't work, but it was really cool. Google Brain, and a lot of machine learning efforts was an X project. Chorus is looking to reshape supply chains. Liftware, much smaller, but it was amazing to have a device where someone with palsy who couldn't hold a spoon, as their hand moves, the spoon moves the other way, so they can feed themselves, and they've given them an incredible amount of freedom. Are you using the solution? Just turn on his head. Tara, we're just trying to do this today. Let's see what we got. This is really one of the things I want to talk about. And this is why I went to X. And this is why X is such a great place for innovation and for studying innovation. Because X itself is a moonshot, is an attempt to productionize the creation of completely absurdly large and probably impossible things, to make that a system. And so there has to be a philosophical shift with how we approach things. These are some of the things we do, right? We embrace risk. Yeah, accept it. It's probably not going to work. That's fine. Let's try it and find out. Fall in love with the problem. I talked about how I spent my whole career chasing interesting problems and interesting issues. This was because I loved new problems, and X really believes that's the way to find your passion. Passion motivates you. Passion gives you the ability to keep going when things are frustrating. And every project is frustrating. And no matter what it is, when I worked with sick kids, I was working on the Human Genome Project. It was grand, it was inspiring, and I still got frustrated. And I still, after a few years, was like, I don't know. And this wasn't even an ADHD thing. Everybody does this. Everybody hits a wall where you just have to grind through things to get to success. So having that passion is what lets you keep going. Working on the hard part first. This is what we call the monkey. If you are trying to build, you see the picture. You're trying to develop a monkey who can recite Shakespeare. So what do? The first thing you do, you make a really fancy pedestal with the monkey on it. No, that's what everybody does. It's totally natural, it's totally native to be like, all right, cool, I know how to build a pedestal. I'll take a really cool pedestal for my prototype. No, that's a mistake. Work on the monkey. That's the hard part. That's the part that probably doesn't work. If you can show that you can get a monkey to say the words, to be or not to be, blah, 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 the rest of it, garbage, fine, you've still got much closer to solving the actual problem than all the pedestal work in the world. So work on the hard part first. And that's essentially what I was doing with my career, work on the hard parts. Accept failure, accept learning. Things aren't going to go your way. So when it happens, get intense, have that passion, work on the problem, but then step back every once in a while and say, is this actually working? No, it's not. And it's not going to work. A lot of the time, when you're working on problems in research and development, you know long before you accept that it's not going to work. Now, that doesn't mean you don't try to drill hard and crack that nut. But as soon as you know that it's not going to work, accept that it's not going to work. Tell people, we've decided to kill this project. We have a thing called DIA-X, which is based on the next Day of the Dead for our projects, where we celebrate all the projects that we've killed in the past at X. And once a year, we basically throw a party where we tell stories about projects that we killed that didn't work. When someone at a project, or project lead stands up, sends an email and says, we've decided to turn down project, unicorn part, because this part is working, well, it's going to be better. That's celebrated, because they've done the hardest part, which is to say, cool, it's not working, let's try something else. And the company gives us a certain degree of stability. We don't have to worry about our jobs. That's the genius of X, is that we're going to find a different team, we're going to find a different project, we're going to find something else to work on. We don't have to worry about our career, our livelihoods, our son's food, all the rest of it. It's going to be there. Aim for 10x. This comes from Google. I've been for a long time. 10x not 10%. Look, there's nothing wrong with making 10% improvement. You make 10% improvement in Google's revenue, you can buy small countries. But that's not what X is about. X is about things that will radically change the world to make it better. And to do that, we have to go off in left field. Okay? If I ask you to make a car which goes 10% faster. You're gonna look at how to engineer that, which bolts can we strip out, where everything needs to change the cylinder alignments, all the rest of it. Why ask you to make a car that goes 10 times faster? You take the entire boat, throw it out the window, and start over. And that's what you have to do to get the 10x over. Diversity of opinions, diversity of perspectives, diversity of ways of thinking, which is, hopefully what I can help with. Those diversities are how you get that new direction. The last three, making contact with the real world. This is something we talk about a lot. Get out there, try projects, find customers, find people who care. Learn to love your V0 crowd. We've all written papers, hopefully your essays, and you're starting to say that V0, we want V3 final, that's it. But start with V0. V0, get some opinions, show it to people, talk to people, ask them what they think. And then, look long term. That's what we're looking for. So all of these, you can see shades of my career and how I chose to do these things, bouncing around to, the Human Genome Project, and Google Research, all the rest of it. X was a reflection of these things. One of the things that I think is particularly important for students, for a lot of people, is this concept of accepting failure and embracing failure. It lets you help with risk, it lets you help with psychological safety. Do you get to talk about psychological safety at all in undergrad or grad school? No? It's a very important concept. Go look it up. Psychological safety is the idea that you won't be punished for being wrong. And if you can work in an environment where you're not punished for being wrong, it means you can take risks. And if you can take risks, you can find the right answer so much faster. This is critical to building an innovative environment. But it's hard, it's expensive, it requires faith, it requires training. So, embracing failure is really cool. I want to talk about Loom, which was a former X project, where they had these giant balloons that basically had a solar-powered optical mesh network and then a cellular repeater built into the balloon. So there was a fleet of these, and they could dispatch them somewhere and be like, you have a cellular network. We did this once, I think it was an earthquake in Haiti, if I remember correctly, and they're like 36 hours later, cool, you now have a cell network. Why? Because we floated a bunch of balloons there. The project didn't work out, the financing of it didn't work out, but what they did was they took one of these technologies that they'd worked on, and they had to come up with a bunch of new innovations to make this network work. And they're like, what if we just take the transmitters? Because these transmitters that we figured out, these things have 20 gigabits per second over a 20-mile range. That's just absolutely changing the infrastructure. So at the moment, there are two of them pointed from opposite sides of the Congo River, because they've never been able to get a network connection over the Congo. And now they have a 20 gigabit per second network, just like that. That's taking a failure and turning it into a success. Cool. All right, so everything in my career was easy. Everything was great. I got to work on the school project. It was fantastic. No, definitely not. And I say happily because I do believe in that line earlier, about 100 bad days gives you 100 interesting stories. Did I even show that slide? There's an AJR song. 100 bad days gives you 100 interesting stories. 100 interesting stories makes you interesting parties. And I really believe that. It's been good for me. But I've been a borderline failure a lot in my life. My grades in undergrad were pretty sketchy. I got there, but it wasn't great. It was touch and go for a while. In grad school, I actually left my candidacy too late, so I had to get a special exception to get a transfer into a PhD program. In high school, I almost got kicked out of high school because I insisted on doing my homework my own way, which was often wrong. And I didn't work well with others. So it's been a big old mess. Sometimes it's worked out. There's been a lot of imposter syndrome. I'll tell you the failures like that lead to a lot of imposter syndrome. Everybody at Alphabet has imposter syndrome. Everybody's just eventually they're gonna figure out that they let you in, they shouldn't have done that, should be fired. Eventually you get used to it, but not really. So there are some kinds of thinking different, which are bad. I'm just gonna go straight up and say they're bad, okay? Procrastination, laziness, being argumentative. These are being different, but they're not good different. Except these are kind of the words that get used to describe people with ADHD a lot. Okay? Things like lazy, things like procrastinating. They're argumentative and different. So that raises the question then, how do we tell the difference? How do we tell the difference between the kinds of thinking that will help us succeed and the kinds of thinking differently that are going to make us fail? That, more than anything, is what keeps me up at night. Is what, I've had some success talking about it. And these words get used to describe, ADHD, all sorts of neurodivergencies, whether it's autism. I'm not a psychiatrist, not even a psychologist, not even, I know nothing about this, but I did, when I got diagnosed with ADHD, go to reading, trying to learn about this thing. What was this diagnosis that I got, and what can I know about it? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I learned to deal with my differences in thinking, and how maybe that'll help you think about your differences. Because like I said, finding how you think differently is the secret to fitting in to a problem, to being the key in the lock that is this problem that you want to work on, and so finding those solutions. That's what I call innovation. So for ADHD, for example, it's easy to think about new things, lots of ideas, creative writing. We fan out through ideas, but staying on a single idea is hard. This is true, by the way, for other types of neurodivergence, but like I said, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to try and talk about those too much. But if you think that they feel like you, if you feel like those are your challenges, learn, go out there, find it. So, 3 points. 3 points I want to talk about with ADHD. First one, diagnosis is not a verdict. Okay? If you are diagnosed with whether it's ADHD or something else, it doesn't say this is who you are. It's a piece of information. Maybe this is useful information. Maybe you can use it. You do have to make use of it yourself, intentionally. You have to choose to engage with that information and change your decisions using it. Just saying, cool, I got a piece of paper, put it in the closet, I'm good. Got the diagnosis, now I'm safe. No. And knowing doesn't fix everything. One of the interesting things about ADHD is that knowing that you have it makes some things easier. And it's a spectrum, like any kind of diagnosis. If it doesn't actually cause you a problem, it's not a disorder. Okay, everybody has difficulty with time management. Okay, fine. That's just normal, that's human nature. But if it causes you a problem, if you try to fix it but you can't, if you're talking and thinking about this and you want to do it differently, and you try repeatedly to do things differently, I cannot tell you how many different day timers, planners, catalogs, calendars, everything that I've been through, task systems, remember the milk, you name it. And it's just, it wasn't until I was 27, 28 years old that I actually got a diagnosis for ADHD. Okay? Someone gave me a newspaper article that was like, here's a list of 7 things. If more than 3 of these describe you, right? No, sorry, 10 things. And it was if more than 4 of these describe you, you might have adult onset attention deficit disorder. Conservatively 8, probably 9 in my case. So when I actually went and talked to a psychiatrist, the university had a psychiatrist I could talk to, education psych, went through this thing, I did the diagnosis thing, got a nice little package, told me, cool, here's some things to be aware of, I can go do some more research. If I read between the lines, it basically said, how did you graduate from high school? Like, it was a mess. But knowing this gave me information that I could then act on. Gave me a name for this thing that had been bugging me my whole life. It also took a lot of guilt away. Okay? All my life I've been told, Gavin's a nice boy, but he'd do so much better if he applied himself. I literally don't know how many report cards have said that. But God, I hated myself for that failure. I hated myself for like a decade, 2 decades probably, because I was just not choosing to do it right. It's not a choice. If I could choose to do it right, it wouldn't be ADHD. It would just be, cool, buckle down. Or you could make things better by learning tools, by learning work ethic. But knowing that it was a challenge that I was going to have to engage with separately took a lot of guilt off my chest. Taking that self-loathing away made it easier for me to focus and learn and iterate and keep moving, get better at it. So that was really important. So point number 2, knowledge. Like I said, when I got this diagnosis, I went in and did a lot of research. Did a lot of reading, read some papers down. Talked to some people, talked to the site, talked to friends, learned things. And remember how we talked about we were training a neural network? Step 2 was figure out how wrong we were with our guess. So this is kind of important, right? You have to be able to, like, we know where we stand. That's hard. So knowing more about what it is, whatever your way of thinking differently is, its upsides, its downsides. Step 2 is knowledge and learning those things about it. ADHD, in my case, was not what I thought it was. Okay, I knew that I didn't have ADHD at 26 years old because when I'm coding, when I get in a groove, when I get in that really good coding groove, you could march a brass band of naked supermodels past me, and I wouldn't even notice. I am in the groove, I am coding, I'm not going to notice that. So I can't have attention deficit disorder, because I can really focus when I want to. No. The important part was the want to. Okay, so distraction. Everybody knows about distraction, but also knowing that I was more susceptible to hormones, knowing that I was more susceptible to having my decisions swayed by my body's reactions. Time blindness. Time blindness really caught me sideways. If you said to someone who was blind, or who had, say, I don't know, really bad vision, really blurry vision with no glasses, cool, please go and throw some darts at this dark light. You wouldn't say, well, look better. You need to look more carefully. I can't. They're blind. Time blindness is this idea with attention deficit disorder. Time, your brain does not process time the same way that most people do. So I don't see the assignment coming. It's 2 weeks out. It's 1 week out. 6 days out. Cool. Working soon. 4 days out. Working soon. Due tomorrow. Oh, crap. I better start working on this thing. Okay? That timeline is the ability to gauge how long will things take, how much time do I have, how do I space these things. It was incredibly important to understand that this was just something my brain was not good at, so that I could externalize it. And I'll talk about strategies, but the first part was understanding what it was. The paradox of hyperfocusing. I talked about this idea that when you get into a groove, when you find something that triggers, that gets your dopamine levels above that threshold for salience and tells your brain, oh, this thing's important, it's time to focus. If you can get there, everything else is gone. Like the building is burning down around you, and it's all gone. So that's hyperfocusing, and it is an intrinsic trait of the way that your brain works with attention deficit disorder. Also hurting other people. Okay? This is not a good thing. People with attention deficit disorder can really frustrate their loved ones, frustrate their employees, make them angry, and you don't want to. I knew I was hurting my friends. I knew I was pissing them off. I knew I was making people angry. And I was just like, it's my fault. No, it turns out that I can't control these things. The damage that I'm doing, I need to be aware of it so that I can cope with it. All right, step 3, point 3. Strategies. There are 3, I'm going to break this down into 3 columns here. First one is strategies for dealing with this. And this is true for any kind of time management, but it's particularly important for folks with attention issues. Choose interesting problems. Okay? It's going to be hard to focus anyway. It's true for everybody. So why not choose something really important and big and interesting? So A, the more interesting it is, the easier it is to focus on. B, even if you squeak out a C and graduate and finish it, you've done something amazing. Instead of getting a C on something that's mediocre, you've gotten a C on something that's incredible. And just like the X mentality of aiming large, if you aim large enough for the problem you're trying to solve or the solution you're looking at, little problems aren't really relevant. Okay, if your solution is big, little problems get dwarfed. Same thing here. If your problem is big enough, little failures fade into the background. So this is a strategy for me. Working with other people. This is true of everyone, not just ADHD, but working with other people is critical. Pair programming is my favorite thing in the whole world. Terrifying. Scares the crap out of me. Okay? But pair programming is amazing. Because I'm way more than twice as fast when I'm pair programming with someone else, sitting there with 2 keyboards, 1 screen, talking, writing code together. Working with people keeps me on task, keeps me on target. Because there's another person right here. I can't just go off and read Facebook. I can't just go off and start watching Twitch, because it's there. They keep me, the 2 brains synergize and work together. Asking for help from other people, for professors. Talk to professors at the beginning of the term. Not at the end of the term like I did, where I go to the professor with 2 days left and I'm like, I have more difficulty, could I have an extension? I've gone to the professor, remember Professor McCool, who used to teach graphics. If I'd gone to the beginning of the term and said, I'm going to have a lot of difficulty with this. Can we break this down and have incremental deadlines? It's not the professor's job to make your life easier. Whether it's ADHD, different kind of thinking, or just however you approach it, it's not the professor's responsibility. The professors will almost always help you if you ask up front. They really want to. So if you say to them, can you take this assignment and break it down into 1 week chunks for me, so that I have to check in with you once a week and get things done, instead of leaving it for the end of the term. Because that timeline is 3 months. It's the same as 3 weeks. It's the same as 3 days to my brain. So I'm just going to wait until there's some time left. 3 days. I'm going to fail this course. So talk to your professors. Get help. Talk to your managers when you work in the work industry. Talk to your tech leads. Talk to your family. Talk to your spouses. Okay? Work with those people. Not just on you, but just tell them what you need, and then they can help you, and you will stop hurting them. Accept your weaknesses. This is mostly just a case of humility, but it really helps to just say, look, this is going to be hard. The more you've internalized it, the easier it is to focus. There's this concept called, for everyone, when you're deciding what to do next, called the critical moment of choice. And the critical moment of choice is the point where you sit down at the keyboard and say, okay, I should start working. And that's the point where you get distracted, or something to work on something else, or work on the right thing. And that critical moment of choice, if you have a plan, okay, that you're ready to go to that critical moment of choice, then you sit down and you start. You don't make a mistake, you don't get distracted. So you plan to have a plan ahead of time. And yeah, be forgiving with yourself. Whether it's ADHD or something else, we have a concept at Alphabet called the blameless postmortem, right? And this applies whether you've just written a bug in code that costs 2 hours, or you wrote a bug in code that costs $2 billion. And those happen. And there was a guy who told a fantastic story to me about changing the way that fonts were rendered on Google Ads so that the clicking worked a little bit differently. And all of a sudden his metrics just started falling off cliffs. And it was costing millions of dollars per minute in terms of the number of ads that were not getting clicked on. Doesn't get fired. Writes the postmortem. Postmortem is a documented. This is what went wrong. This is what happened. This is who. This is why. This is how we make it not happen again. What system do we need to set up in terms of A/B tests or rollouts or canaries to stop this mistake next time? You learn. That's the X mentality. Learn from the failures. Same thing for you as people. You have your failures. Learn from them. Try to have the blameless. Doesn't mean ignore them. Doesn't mean, no, I couldn't have done anything differently. How do I make this not happen next time? Cool. Now I can let it go. I don't have to beat myself up over this. All right? Medication. Medication is a sensitive subject. Like I said, I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor of any kind. So I'm not going to say what is or isn't work for people, but I can tell you that almost everybody with attention deficit disorder is terrified at the idea of medication. Because ADHD makes you creative. Makes you think fast. You spend your whole life working with that idea, whatever your way of thinking differently. It's wrapped up. But if you take that away, I'm nothing. Like now I'm just the bad sides. If you medicate away my creativity, I'm worthless. And that is terrifying. When I was talking to I was very fortunate because I had a really, really smart lady who was my head psych. And she said to me, yeah, I get it. But Gavin, you're at the University of Calgary, you're a PhD. You got 2 degrees simultaneously from the University of Waterloo. Your brain is a Formula 1 car. You run on high octane fuel all the time. And you desperately feel that you're running fast. And you're desperately terrified that we're going to put a brake or an engine retarder of some kind on this thing that makes you special. Medication done right isn't slowing the engine down. It's a steering wheel. It lets you control this thing and go where you want to go and do what you want to do. And I was like, all right, yeah, I would really appreciate a steering wheel every once in a while. So if this is the right tool for you, don't be afraid of medication. Learn, try different things, try different medication, explore them, figure out the right dosage, find one that works for you and makes you happy. Because remember, it doesn't cause a problem, it's not a disorder. But if it If the medication can make you happier because it makes you more productive or less frustrated or less self-loathing, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So it is one of the tools in the toolbox. There's also other tools like structure. Okay? Structure is the way you set up. Remember to talk about knowing what your weaknesses are? Give yourself the right structure. Give yourself a place to work that is quiet and is free of distractions. Focus time. Put focus time in your calendar and tell people, no, this 4-hour block. I'm just not going to answer messages. And in jobs, at companies, you will have to do this because people will constantly be interrupting you. And you will have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not the kind of person. And this is true, honestly, for everybody. I don't think this is attention deficit specific. Having that, focus time block, where you just say, I'm sorry, today's my no meetings day. I'm going to work for the next 8 hours. I'm going to crank out some code. It always makes me feel great. Talk to other people. Use resources, use rewards, make a plan. Give yourself a time block at the beginning of the day where you learn. This is what I'm going to do each day, this is what I'm going to do, and you stick to the plan. If you could do it easily, you wouldn't have ADHD. I wouldn't have ADHD. But having a system, the reinforcement where in that critical moment of choice, I don't have to think, what should I do next? I know what I'm going to do next. I have a plan. I follow the plan, I'm good. That makes it so much easier. So, those are my 3 ways of looking at ADHD, thinking differently, and how thinking differently leads to better innovation. These are some of the people who have helped me along the way. Morris Cheers, a professor over science, he was fantastic. He was going to help me do 2 degrees at the same time in the first place. My family, I owe a lot. So it is what it is. These are some other questions I could answer if people are interested, or I'm happy to take other questions. I've been rambling for going on 40 minutes now, so I'll stop and talk about stuff. Hopefully that was informative, hopefully that was interesting, and you can always find that link if you have other questions or like that.
That was a very insightful talk, and I hope you guys all got something out of it. These are a bunch of questions you guys can ask, but does anyone have any questions you want to ask Gavin? He's completely free right now. Yeah, over there.
I guess you said you got diagnosed in '97.
Yep.
Do you ever wish that you got diagnosed earlier, or did you feel like it was different?
Yes and no. So I was born in '77. In the '80s, ADHD was treated very heavily with Ritalin, large doses of Ritalin, especially in kids. So when I got diagnosed as an adult and I finally got around to it, everybody's reaction, all my friends, everybody was like, yeah, duh. Why didn't you tell me? They knew, but my parents definitely knew, but decided that was not the right time. If I was born later, now I know what we know as a society more about it, I think I would have been more successful, and I would have had a quicker path to success. But thinking differently led me to do all these weird things, which made me happy. So only if magically it could have not been overtreated, and that's you can build up dosages until you find the right dosage for yourself.
You mentioned having someone else a peer programming kind of keeps you from getting distracted, keeps you on your toes. I think it's are we so kind of childish that we need essentially babysitters, that we need kind of someone to? It's
Yeah, no, that's actually a brilliant insight, because it's not about, hopefully, for me, working with someone else is less about having them supervise me and more about the fact that I can help them. Much of my most productive work is when people ask me for help with things and I can help them work on it together. It's actually really important that I avoid one of the most important decisions I ever made was paying someone else to help me coach through some of my attention deficit challenges. Because if I hadn't, unfortunately, Google pays me very well. I can take some of that money, I can do that. Not everybody can. That's a privilege that I acknowledge. But it worked out very well for me, because the alternative was that realistically it was going to fall to my wife or my family or my friends to cope with my failures, to clean up my messes, because I was going to keep making them. Get better, but I'm going to keep making them. And I decided that wasn't fair. So I was going to try try and make it this person's problem to help me clean up my messes and avoid my messes. I was going to pay them for that. I was going to respect their time. Likewise with pair programming. Is pair programming a concept that ever comes up? Because I didn't actually encounter it until college, like until grad school. It's basically the idea of you have two keyboards, one screen. You sit side by side and you work on code together. And you talk like, you're going to try this, you know, all right, put a decorator there. All right. We all do it during assignments. It's just that we started to figure out that doing it in industry is also a really good idea. Just sit and work together because two people are usually twice as fast. So it's less that we need a babysitter and more that it's the right environment for us to be maximally productive and help them as well. But you have to respect their time. If they're not getting as much out of it as you are, then it's a parasitic relationship.
So they keep you on your toes.
You keep on your toes, and just most of us, just having someone looking over your shoulder, like interacting, it engages that part of your brain, just the social interaction, and that, you know, the back and forth, the flow, and having those things where you're talking about it, thinking about it, and articulating. Attention deficit is an executive center disorder. It's the part of your brain which is deciding what to do. Then it has difficulty. When you are socializing with people, when you're talking, when you're articulating what it is you want to do, it's the same way that we talk about if you really want to understand something, teach it to someone else. There is no better way to study for an exam than to teach someone else what they need to know for that exam. That's true for almost everybody. Everybody, but almost everybody. Same thing. You're working with someone, you're having to articulate, you're having to move into those centers of your brain where you get it out of the fast-moving, you know, melange of embedded knowledge in the back and into that concrete symbolic knowledge that you're sharing with somebody else. That requires you to frame it, get it down, get it out. And then all of a sudden, the ideas start to crack.
Hi, Gavin. So I'm Wei, to be mechatronics engineer here. And so my question is, how does X pick a problem to solve, and what makes like a problem to solve? How do they analyze what's important outside?
So the question was, how does X choose which projects to work on? And then how do we, you know, how do we make sure they're important? How do we? So the good news is, it's kind of synergistic. We choose problems to work on, which are the ones that are important, the ones that are going to change. Usually we measure things in dollars, but not always. Sometimes we measure things in terms of lives saved. Sometimes we measure things in terms of degrees of climate change avoided, gigatons of carbon sequestered. There's no way, until we get policy change to accept the cost of carbon sequestration, that this needs to happen, we just have to say, look, this needs to be done. Let's figure it out. We have what we call the early pipeline, which is usually teams of 1 to 3 people. We spend time harvesting ideas, looking for projects, combing through literature, spitballing crazy ideas, reading science fiction, you name it. And then put them together, comb through, choose a few, try some things. Sometimes it's just that someone goes and works on a project for a while. I recently joined a new project that someone was like, hey, what if we tried this? So I told my boss I'm going to spend 5 hours a week just tinkering with that thing. We'll try it for a little while. If it works, it starts to snowball, and we'll continue forward. We have teams of product people who, you know, are really good at doing things like techno-economic analysis. So how will this scale? Who will this impact? Who will this help? Who will it hurt? Well, these are the questions you got to ask, and then say, okay. But in the end, usually the question comes down to, does this have a hardcore problem that nobody else has an answer to, that if we solved, would change the world? Cool, let's go science. Cool. Make sense? Yeah. Sure, okay, no, we got blue, and then we got blue, and then we got blue.
So you have an interesting idea about do you approach the hardest problem first, and a lot of people talk about we should approach the smaller problem first and step by step. So I think I want to ask is why it helped you to like, you know, like do this thing correctly, and then what's the difference you find out?
So usually when people talk about approaching the smallest problem first, what they're doing is trying to take the problem and break it down into smaller pieces and say, okay, cool, let's solve this for order 1, then order 10, then order 100, and they scale up from there. And that is actually something we still try to do. But the idea is to figure out what's the thing that won't scale, or what's the thing that is really challenging. So working on the smallest part of the problem is good because solvable part of the problem. But it can lead you down that track of working on the thing that you know how to work on. And if you know how to work on it, a lot of people can work. I mean, there's a lot of smart people out there. So if you are trying to find something just truly innovative, you need to find something that most people or nobody has figured out how to do. That's what makes it innovative. And in that regard, what you want to do is sort through all the parts of the problem and be like, this is the thing that causes people to fail. Everybody's tried this, and they've all stumbled over this part. Cool. Let's attack that first. Because that's the real difference. And sometimes you try it, and you're like, oh, yeah, this violates several laws of physics. Okay, never mind. Cool. Write a report. Put it, we have a thing called the graveyard, which is just hundreds of documents of things that have been tried and why they didn't work. And there's like reactivation criteria there. So yeah, that's basically why we think it's best to work on that. Not necessarily big versus small, but important versus, once we get to the place where it's a question of scaling and engineering and robust, then it's no longer X's problem. Now we make a company, they've got contact with the real world, and they start to spin up from there. But the proof of whether it's possible or not, that's the difference.
Why does the ADHD people like?
Because it's really hard. And there's something about something that is a personal challenge, which activates some of those hormones, some of those parts of the brain that, get angry. Make it personal. So attacking a problem which is really hard is really good for someone because it gives you motivation, extrinsic motivation. I think I need to turn my All right, question?
Yeah, if you can say, what is getting you excited right now?
Oh, wow. All right, I think carefully about which ones I can talk about. The worst part of going from academics to Google. Google's a pretty open company, but it's still very much more secretive than academia where I just publish everything. And then going to X, everything's really secretive, which I hate. LLMs, obviously, changing the world. Biology, I think I called my shot pretty well in terms of CRISPR and changes in biology. There's a lot of interesting things in terms of so the way that social media is shifting a little bit towards what I call federated solutions. Whether they get the traction they need, I don't know, but if they do, it will be a fairly seismic shift in the way that people interact. At the moment, most of the interaction platforms that we have are centrally controlled, which leads to certain incentives. If, because of certain people driving certain social media websites off of a cliff, we're seeing a lot of other things taking up some traction. If that works, if some of those federated systems start to work, I think it could actually be a much bigger deal than we think. So those are the ones that I've been paying attention to. There's a few others internally. There's one project inside X that I can't talk about at all. It's still totally secret. We'll know within 3 months whether it's going to work or not. And it's a physical switch. It's either going to work or it doesn't. And if it does, it changes everything. Like 5%. 1 second.
So if you're tackling giant problems and the biggest, hardest parts of problems first, how do you deal with planning and unknowns in those situations? Do you try to quantify them? Do you try to do stuff? What are some strategies around that you might employ?
So I go and I find a really good PGM and I let them do the planning for me. Okay, silly story. I was working at radiology, and I was spinning up a radiology team, which was basically me initially. So we got access to some medical images, data, we're doing some modeling on that, and I've been told, cool, we're making this new team. So now there were 4 people. There was me, there was a senior engineer who had been added there, we were starting some hiring, there was a product manager, and there was a PGM program manager. And somebody commented in this meeting, they're like, yeah, this team's growing so fast, we're only at 4 people. I'll get to the point, I promise. And I said, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't actually help me build anything. Because we've gone from 1 engineer working to 1 engineer working and 1 engineer hiring to that program manager, her name was Lizzie Rourke, she was amazing, said to me, okay, fair, but I'll make you eat your words. And she was really good at clearing the runway, planning, figuring out what we were gonna need, looking forward, helping you say what are the hard problems, what's gonna come next. And in the end, when she left the company, I actually baked her a cake that said Gavin's words at the top, so that we could all eat Gavin's words. So there's a lot of work that goes into how to plan these things. The whole agile movement, for example, came out of this concept that planning time for software engineering. It's even worse when you don't know what you're trying to build or what's going to work. But you can try to break it down into pieces. You can start one at a time. You can say, this is what we know we can run this experiment. We can test this thing in this amount of time. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the answer is going to be. But we know at least we can run this experiment in this amount of time, and then we will make a decision what comes next. So it's much more iterative. It's much more short focus. Tiger beetle is a phrase that gets used a lot where you look up, make a decision, put your head down and go, and then look up, so yeah, that iteration and that the whole agile thing was, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. But in terms of long-term planning, you probably want to ask someone who's better at it, because I usually just tell them what are the hard parts, and they're like, great, how long is it going to take to do it? I'm like, well, try this. Like, great, cool, see you in 3 weeks. Totally crazy. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had a research in the as a PhD student, but then why did you decide to go into the industry kind of research instead of staying in an academia environment? And if you have to compare, what are some pros and cons?
So the question was basically why did I go to the industry instead of staying in academia? It wasn't easy. I'll be honest, I think that the postdoc system as it exists is terrible and second only to the medical student system that exists in terms of how terrible it is. So while academia, I think, is purity of love, the postdoc grind you have to do to get from being a PhD student, just offended, to an industry, like to an academic position, like an associate or a professor, is really tough. And it was going to require a lot of heads down commitment, a lot of staying on the same track, producing, publish or perish. And it wasn't for me. So I did that. There is an unfortunate side effect that because of the way our capitalist society is structured, industry has more money, which means we drain a lot of the best brains from academia. And I'm one of them. I mean, I'm not one of the best brains, but I'm one of the people who are brains. In the end, if the pure pursuit of knowledge is what makes your heart sing, if working on the question and saying, I have showed something that 1,000 years from now will still be true, and when someone says, who figured out that this particular ion works this particular way, the answer will be your name. If that makes your heart sing, then academia is a better bet for you. But if it was also the fact that it took me a long time to get to my PhD. It took 7 years, six years to do like 2 undergrads more like 4 years and 6 kids, another 6 years for my PhD. I was 34, had a newborn son. And because of my PhD, I had kind of taken this stupid road to get there. And I was like, all right, well, it's probably time to talk about it. So for me, that's the decision. But I would say those are it's about what makes you happy. And if what makes you happy is the pursuit of knowledge and teaching is building this truth system we call universities, then yeah, there is no replacement for that. Yeah.
Thank you for, I really empathize with what you said about your failures and appreciate your vulnerability and sharing all of that. And I guess I have 2 questions. The first is a bit easier, and the second is more kind of all over the place. So the first is, for me, I'm interested in pursuing economics and machine learning postgrad. And from your
I don't think they're going different directions. People are the only things that companies steal from academia. The nice thing about academia is that it publishes ideas, and companies love to take those ideas and capitalize on them. So usually we're constantly monitoring research that's being done at universities. Reach out. Nice thing about Alphabet, we can do academic partnerships, we compare with people. So we try to be learning constantly about new networks, about DNAGP and all the rest of it, something, these things that are being used for doing analysis or learning new architectures, new experiments, new data sets. The incentives are different. And so fundamentally, usually where there's a difference is that the university has the intellectual courage to be able to say we're going to keep working on the problem because it will tell us something informative or interesting. Whereas the companies will give up once they figure out that they're not going to make $1 billion off of it. And so that's where things start to fray a little bit. And then which one drives you, I would say, is where again, like the previous things, sort of what to center on. But in general, making the jump from one to the other is not as hard as it seems. From industry to academia or academia to industry, especially if you're looking at really applied academic bent. It was genomics and machine learning were the two you said, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe my second part of the question to provide more clarity on what I'm thinking of specifically. I guess my dream for the future would be that we could quantify and model an entire person's response based off of their genomic and epigenetic data of how they would respond to treatments, resistance mechanisms, how their germline mutations predispose them to different mutations they might acquire in their real life. But in the different labs that I've kind of seen, I think there's a bit of, and also in machine learning techniques, I find there's like this dissonance between maybe if I can extend the metaphor in different ways, rare variants versus, let's say, a common variant. Or in machine learning, for example, if we use PCA, we might look for the most significant variables, the most significant components versus, and cut away all of the other ones. Just try and find the main components versus losing all of that other base data lower components. And so I find it's really difficult because my dream would be to understand the entire genome and the basic biology plan.
This is often described as the orphan disease problem. There are a lot of diseases that have so few people working on them, especially coming top down from the disease perspective as opposed to bottom up in terms of systems components. But it's the same problem that there just isn't enough data to study the long tail of the problem. So usually what we end up doing is taking those first few principal components of the data and saying, great, this gets us 96% of the way there, 4% whatever. Turns out 4% is a lot of people, or a lot of systems, or whatever it is. That is somewhere that over time it will change. The dream of having a comprehensive biological reflection system where we can model responses to drugs or treatments or disease or condition or environment based on genomic data, based on whether it's epigenetics, etc. People have been talking about personalized medicine for about 30 years, give or take. When I first started working on it, it was the thing that was going to come really quickly. As soon as the Human Genome Project was finished, we'd have this. No. But that doesn't mean that we'll never get there, but I don't think we're going to get there in the next 5 years. I think it's more of a 20 to 30 year dream. It may go asymptotic in the same way that machine learning did, but mostly it is a problem with data. It is a problem of getting enough sample variance in those parts of the sample space and in those parts of the response space to be able to learn what you need to learn, or the ability to build on them from a molecular perspective. But we're still a long way from doing that. So it would be nice. It's definitely why I'm here. But it's not going to happen this year, that's for sure. So I would say keep working on it, but accept that you're going to be working on a piece of the puzzle, not the big puzzle. Because now, what I would say is go find the hardest part of that big puzzle. Choose your piece to be the one that's why doesn't this work? Why can't we do this? It's this is the problem. Cool. Go and find or build a data set to solve that piece. And if you can show the momentum there, then somebody will scale it up.
have time for one more question, so go ahead.
I'm going to use one of yours that was on there. It's a lot less complex than the previous question, but I want to get your take on do grades matter everywhere.
Sure, yeah. I promise the answer is yes. So, yes and no, but mostly yes. So I talked about how school needs to do things, knowledge and certification, and they both important. And sometimes it's really frustrating because professors forget that the certification is part of this. But that really, like, you need to, like, you have to earn it. But then getting the piece of paper that you can show to someone and say, cool, can you give me the job now, please, is part of why we work here. So in that regard, yes, marks, grades, important. They give you something to strive against. I often got detached from that. I didn't really, in my mind, properly couple success on a grades perspective from success in learning. I was like, I'm gonna learn it. And part of that was because I had some bad experiences where I learned things and as a result got bad grades. And that was really frustrating. But realistically, while the system is imperfect, it is structured in a way for the most part that it gives you something to strive against, which regardless of how your brain works, goals are universal motivators. There's like what you think. Nobody's going to care about your grades once you get into grad school. Like, they're very important for getting into grad school. And then comes to I love doing a PhD. It gave me a hard deadline. It gave me a thing to work on. So the grades are important there. I actually had to go and do some more school to just show, like, I took a bunch of courses. I took Latin and economics and biochemistry and a couple of grad courses. And I was like, look, I can get all A's. And they're like, cool. But once you have your job, it's this weird thing where it totally matters for like 3 weeks. It shapes the rest of your life for 3 weeks, and then nobody will ever care again, except you. But in that regard, both in terms of the struggle and the certification, the learning and the certification, yes, they both bear up to be pretty important. Anything else? Good?
Good?
I'll be around.
Be around for Gavin. If you have any other burning questions that you would like to ask Gavin, he's just going to stick around for a bit, so feel free to stand up and get in line. Otherwise, thank you, Gavin, for this wonderful speech and the wonderful Q&A as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. And yeah, how can people contact you if they want to get in touch?
Probably LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me because you know it's going to be, you can look at my, like, it's the one place on the internet where I actually disclose the stuff to make myself. So you'd be like, oh yes, this is it. It's also geomancer@gmail.com. So you can email me.
Gavin, Duggan, on LinkedIn or Gmail, for sure. Please clean up after yourself. The garbage is right there. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day.
Cool.